अस्सलाम वालेकुम फ्रेंड्स, I'm सादिया सगीर। वेलकम बैक टू दिस यूट्यूब चैनल। आज मैं आप लोगों के साथ एक असाइनमेंट शेयर करने लगी हूँ विच इज़ बेस्ड ऑन द करेक्टर ऑफ लेडी ब्रिस्को। So Lily Briscoe is a middle-aged unmarried painter with Chinese eyes and puckered face. Lily is a passionate artist. Like Mr. Ramsay, she worries over the fate of her work, fearing that her painting will be hung in attics or tossed absent-mindedly under a couch. टू द लाइट हाउस में लिली ब्रिस्को का करैक्टर बहुत अहम और बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है अकॉर्डिंग टू द एग्जामिनेशन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू। और मिस्टर रैमसे की तरह इस नावल में लिली ब्रिस्को भी छोटी छोटी बातों पर बहुत ज़्यादा फ़िक्रमंद रहती है। अपनी पेंटिंग्स को लेकर वो बहुत फ़िक्रमंद रहती है। शी इज़ अ डिवोटेड आर्टिस्ट एंड मोस्ट प्रोबेबली शी हैज़ kept herself single because marriage and family life are likely to become in the way of her artistic activity. एज अ आर्टिस्ट लिली ब्रिस्को ने खुद को सिंगर रखा है क्योंकि इसका ख्याल था कि मैरिज लाइफ में वो अपनी आर्टिस्टिक एक्टिविटी को कभी भी अच्छे से परफॉर्म नहीं कर सकेगी। According to Bernard Blackstone, Lily Briscoe says and does little in the course of the novel, but she is a very important character. Together with William Banks, she constitutes a kind of Greek chorus, comments on the personality of the Ramsays. Lily gives us the feminine viewpoint, William the masculine. As Lily is painting in the lawn of the summer house of the Ramsays in the Isle of Skye, memories crowd in upon her. It is through Lily that the past is brought to bear upon the present and considerable light is thrown on the other characters. Lily's imagination is visual and pictorial, therefore vivid pictures from the past keep welling upon in her mind. लिली ब्रिस्को का करैक्टर इसलिए सबसे ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है क्योंकि हम सारे नावल में पास्ट की सारी मेमोरीज़ को लिली ब्रिस्को की पेंटिंग के थ्रू ही रिकॉल करते हैं। इसके अलावा लिली ब्रिस्को इसलिए भी ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है इसका करैक्टर क्योंकि मिस्टर और मिसेस रैमसे के करैक्टर्स के बारे में भी यही बताती है कि ये मिस्टर और मिसेस रैमसे किस तरह की पर्सनैलिटीज़ हैं। इन लिलीज माइंड द इमेज ऑफ मिस्टर रैमसे अपेयर एज a scrubbed kitchen table. Once she asked Andrew what his father's book were about. He replied, "Think of a kitchen table when you are not there." He also added that his father studied subject and object and the nature of reality. Really thinks that what a curious way of looking at the world this is. She compared Mr. Ramsay with Mr. Banks. Though she thinks that Mr. Banks is a good person and not a vain, he is entirely impersonal and finer than Mr. Ramsay, without wife or child. He is living entirely for science. Mr. Banks has greatness and Mr. Ramsay has not. She addressed Mr. Banks that Mr. Ramsay is petty, selfish, vain, egotistical person. He is spoiled. He is tyrant. He wore Mrs. Ramsay to death. But he has what you have not, a fiery unworldliness. He knows nothing about trifles. He loves dog and children. He has ate you have known. Did he not come down in 2 coats the other night and let Mrs. Ramsay trim his hair into a pudding basin? According to Lily Briscoe, Mr. Ramsay is not a good person and his personality is very complex and fascinating and not easy to understand. Lily returns to the summer house after 10 years and finds that things have much changed. Mrs. Ramsay is dead and the house is in disorder. But she remembers her picture and the reader again learned through her stream of consciousness. She sits in the lawn and tries to finish her picture. She cannot do it because there is Mr. Ramsay and he is demanding her sympathy. Mr. Ramsay gives a groan, a terrible sight, and wait. But Lily says nothing. She does not seem to see what he wants from her. And then suddenly she looked down at Mr. Ramsay's boot and exclaimed, "What beautiful boots!" And to her surprise, this commendation of his boot is enough for Mr. Ramsay. He smiles and recovers his gaiety. and suddenly she feels a flood of affection for him. She feels his loneliness and his pathos and his goodness. क्योंकि लिली मिस्टर रैमसे को अच्छा नहीं समझती, इसलिए जब वो पेंटिंग कर रही होती है तो मिस्टर रैमसे की मौजूदगी की वजह से उसकी पेंटिंग कंप्लीट नहीं हो रही होती उससे. But suddenly she realized that he is not as bad as she thinks, and she feels his goodness and his loneliness at the same time. As she paints, adding blue and greens, she begins to lose consciousness of her outer thing. Her mind grows up image and sense from the past. In the moment of creation, she thinks of Mrs. Ramsay, how she spreaded happiness around her. जैसे जैसे लिली पेंटिंग कर रही होती है उसके दिमाग में मिसेस रैमसे की इमेज वैसे ही आ रही होती है. वो सोच रही होती है कि कैसे मिसेस रैमसे इनके साथ थी पहले. Here she mentioned the blue and green paints. As she dipped into the blue paint, she dipped too into the past there. Perhaps there is no vast inclusive meaning. The universe is chaos, but only little island of meaning scattered here and there, created by person like Mrs. Ramsay. Meaning valid only for one time and for one place, existing as music exists in the memory. She continues to think of Mrs. Ramsay and think of the multiplicity of her personality, her beauty, her aloofness, her silence, her friendliness, her interferingness and masterfulness, her kindness to the poor and the sick, and the relationship between her and her husband. She reflected that one wanted 50 pairs of eyes to see with. 50 pairs of eyes were not enough to get round that woman, she thought. Lily again focuses her attention on her painting. She looks at the window. Suddenly, she sees someone inside the house sit down by it. It is a vision of Mrs. Ramsay, which enables her to complete her painting. As David Dashes say, symbolically the past return and shape the present. Although Lily is by no means the main character, yet she has more moments of vision than any other character in the novel. Lily is actually aware of the frustration of trying to translate the moment of intensity into art. Although she is painter, yet her comments are sometimes more appropriate to the man of letter. Lily's art actually uses no word but visual form and colors. It takes four separate moments of inspiration over a period of many years for her to finish her picture. The recurring memory of Charles Stanley's challenge insisting that women can neither paint nor write deepened her anxiety. It is with this self-doubt that she began her portrait of Mrs. Ramsay at the beginning of the novel. The first vision occurs before the action of the novel start. While visiting the Ramsays during the first part of the book, she is working on a view of their house. And at dinner in the evening, she has her second inspiration. In a flash, she saw her picture and thought, yes, I shall put the tree further in the middle, then I shall avoid that awkward space. But before she can carry out her painting, everyone leaves Ramsay's summer house. Then in the chapter, time passes. Mrs. Ramsay dies. Lily loses track of her picture, and 10 years passes. But later, Mr. Ramsay unexpectedly reopened the house and invited the guests of that summer house to visit there again. Confronted with the same scene she had been painting, Lily has her third vision of inspiration, which she recalled her precious one. Suddenly, she remembered when she sat there last 10 years ago. There had been a little spring or leaf pattern on the tablecloth, which she had looked at in a moment of revelation. She would paint that picture now. After some initial difficulty, she worked continuously all the morning, and by the moment Mr. Ramsay landed at the lighthouse with his children, her painting seems to be completed. And while she paused to share with Mr. Carmichael to change in the chapter of Mr. Ramsay, it seems as if she were recalled by someone. She turned to her canvas and take up her brush. She looked at the step of the house. She could see an image of Mrs. Ramsay with a sudden intensity, as if she saw it clear for a second. She drew a line there in the center. It was done. It was finished. Yes, she thought, laid down her brush in extreme fatigue. I have had my way on. So by the end of the novel, Lily, a serious and diligent worker, put into practice all that she had learned from Mrs. Ramsay.